Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and today I'm here with George Ortega, and I have a topic that will be very interesting. The idea is that, people in the world see religion as a harm, and they say, oh, religion is bad, science good, and that belief in God is bad, but I think they're fighting the wrong fight because the free will belief is what is the belief that almost every other harmful belief that comes from religion depends on the free will belief. And so it's sort of like people are, in a sense, they are indirectly fighting the symptoms rather than the cause, you might say. They're not hitting the tree at its root, you know.
Right, or a good analogy would be if they were to, let's say, oppose science. Now, you could just basically list a whole litany of ways that science can be harmful, that science has been used to create harm, right? But science can also create good. So it's the same thing with religion. I think your point is right on target. It's not religion that is wrong. It's this free will belief that induces them to, to hate and to all that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and a good comparison would be somebody might point to some harm that science enables, such as atomic bombs or the animal cruelty with lab animal experiments, which are good examples to point to of harm done in the name of science. But here's the deal. That doesn't mean we should be all like science is bad, science is a great harm, and the world should be eliminated of it. Because rather, wouldn't it make sense to rid science of a particular thing that's causing harm rather than just obliterate all of science?
Absolutely. And with religion, for example, you have Buddhism that is profoundly different from Judeo Christianity. And Buddhists just are not militaristic. Buddhists are not filled with hate. They're not filled with these, I mean, sometimes some Buddhist sects have adopted, these concepts of heaven and hell. But, the traditional standard Buddhism doesn't even deal with what happens after we die. It's simply about human happiness.
Yeah, and Buddhism and Taoism and some of those things, some people classify them as religions, whereas sometimes they're classified as philosophy. And I'm often curious about, what is that distinction between what makes something philosophy or what makes it religion? And it's kind of a tricky thing because my impression generally, George, is that the reason that these things are sometimes referred to as philosophies is that because they focus on how to live. They might focus on morals, they might focus on ethics, how to live, that sort of thing. Whereas religions, at least that I know of, tend to focus more on believing a certain thing about what happens after you die, but they could care less about how you live in this life. And I think that's a mistake.
All right. Well, I'm not sure I'd go that far in terms of religion because, for example, Proverbs and Psalms, and just there's a whole, kind of like thrust in religion to be good. What they don't focus on enough, what they've lost sight on of, is that the reason morality is important to religion is because it's very wise route to happiness. But Chandler, I think that the main distinction is, I think, for example, Buddhism is not deistic. So like some religions are. I don't think religion, literally has to denote uh, deism or theism. I think there could be, like, atheistic religions in a sense, like Buddhism. I think, it doesn't deal with the subject of God. Yeah.
Yeah, I have heard Buddhism referred to as an atheistic religion. So perhaps what makes something a religion isn't necessarily a belief in a deity, but rather there's something else about it. And I also agree with your point earlier about, there are focuses in how to live. You mentioned Psalms and Proverbs, and then there's the golden rule, which is common to many religions, and it's often quoted, and sometimes people attribute it to Jesus as if he's the first and only dude who came up with the golden rule, whereas it predates that.
Oh, yeah. And you want to know, even today, religion is really the only societal institution that teaches morality. I mean, you don't get morality in school. You don't even get it in the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system says, like, well, this is wrong. And, if you transgress it, you're going to jail or prison or something, punishment. But it doesn't at all deal with why something is wrong and just this whole exploration and, just evolvement of or just like this way to cultivate an understanding of morality that religion, again, like I don't see, it should be taught in schools, but it's not. Businesses don't deal with it. So religion is really like the institution for morality. And I guess, unfortunately, because of its archaic beliefs, its morality is based on, well, God says this and that's why it's right. And so, like, it's like we have to reform religion rather than just like abandoning it altogether.
Yeah, because there seems to be a problem. There's the problem where we mentioned because in our secondary podcast in personal opinion, you mentioned how science has a problem and that it's amoral. Sometimes it can be good, but sometimes it can be bad because science is about, how things work and understanding the causes of things. It's about truth, but it's not about goodness. It's not about morality. And so religion has been the domain where moral teaching is where we're presented with moral teaching from religion. So I agree with your point completely there, George, is that religion is often what people think of as, well, you learn how to be moral from your religion. And it's kind of tricky because for the past few years I've actually been more like, well, thinking of morality or ethics as a philosophical thing where you think, well, why is this the good thing to do? Why is this bad? And think logically about morality rather than just accepting it unquestioningly from some divine revelation. And I think that's the direction that we are trying to move toward.
Yeah, I have to agree with you completely. I mean, philosophy and to a certain extent psychology is much better prepared to craft, an effective morality than is religion. But the other thing is, like, the problem with philosophy and psychology is, like, there are churches and synagogues and mosques all over the world. People congregate like every week to like, to be exposed to this stuff. You don't have philosophy clubs or psychology clubs where, you know what I'm saying? There's no vehicle of dissemination to the general public within philosophy. They most of the time these philosophers just pretty much write and talk to each other. So, like,
Yeah,
so yeah.
because George, like, for example, unless you're some kind of weirdo who records podcasts like we do, most people are not getting that type of ethical discussion. And
Oh, I know. Go ahead.
yeah, and so here's the deal. This whole thing of discussing ethics needs to be moved outside of philosophy classes, needs to be moved outside of religion. It could still be in those things, of course, but it needs to be out to the public. It needs to be accessible to everyone. Everyone needs to be able to have a discussion about what's good or bad, right or wrong, moral or immoral, and think, well, what's the way that leads to overall happiness? Because I know you're the happiness man, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and the other thing with atheists is, like, they are fighting an unwinnable battle. At least, for, in other words, like, if they believe that people are going to give up God, I mean, that's not going to happen. That's just so, like, rather than, like, or who knows? It might happen in 100 years, of 500, 1,000. By my understanding, like, God and the universe are synonymous. So I'm not sure actually that could happen, but at least they, with the free will thing, these atheists have a chance. They don't have a chance in hell to kind of like get these people to like disbelieve in God. They might right now. I don't know how many, like, there might be like what, 5% of the world is atheist. I don't know if it's that much, but it's a very, very small percentage. So like let them more directly attach the harm that religion causes, especially through free will belief. And then all of a sudden they've got a lot of like religious people on their side. And so like, it's a matter of reforming religion rather than abandoning it altogether.
Yeah, I agree, George. And here's the thing is speaking as a purely practical matter, it's much easier for people to give up the belief in free will than it is for them to give a belief in God. Similarly, it's more practical. This is a funny comparison, I know, but it's more practical to convince people to go vegan rather than convince them to stop having sex, for example. Some things are just psychologically easier for people to handle than others, I've noticed.
Exactly. And again, it's about fighting the right fight. Like for example, with with the fight for abortion, I think the Democrats chose the wrong fight. In terms of like legalizing abortion, that's just like, what they should have been fighting for the last 20, 30 years, not to like legalize abortion and keep it legal, but rather to create a world where no woman in their right mind would want to abort their child. you know
Well,
to
yeah,
yeah,
Lord.
to have like, to ensure that mothers and their children are so well provided for that, again, it would be like, it would be bizarre for any woman to even conceive of that.
Exactly, George. I agree on that completely, as I'm sure you know I would, because here's the deal. The free will belief and the inequality that it creates in poverty, people being blamed for poverty, that sort of thing, and other bizarre things like, women being blamed for getting pregnant. It's your fault if you got raped because you chose to dress this way. That's the kind of world we live in. People are blamed based on free will belief, but it hits the women the hardest because there's still all this sexism in the world. So yeah, but this is very important is that it's important for us to fight the right fight. And here's the deal is I've been fighting the wrong fight for some time, and of course I can't blame myself. I couldn't have done otherwise. But I'm realizing that the harm isn't necessarily belief in God. It's not, it's the problem that we often see in religion. The root of it is in this free will belief. And here's my thought is that if people understand that their thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and opinions, that they did not choose them, that they simply have them as a product of desires and environmental conditioning that they didn't choose either. And that's why, we don't blame people for having different opinions. And as long as people believe in free will, here's what happens. As soon as they disagree on abortion or they disagree on the ethics of eating meat or they disagree on what climate change or whatever it might be, then it's like, well, you are evil because you have a different opinion. And I have to believe this because otherwise I have the wrong opinion and therefore I'm bad. And so you see what goes wrong, George, is that
Chandler, yeah, this is a perfect place for the Searle quote. For the audience, like John Searle, the 13th most cited post 1900 philosopher in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. He's one of the major philosophers. He said, for our world to overcome this free will belief would be, quote, a bigger revolution in our thinking than Einstein or Copernicus or Galileo or Newton or Darwin. It would alter our whole conception of our relation with reality. I mean, end quote. That is how big this is. I mean, like to overcome free will belief would be to create a categorically new world.
absolutely, George. It does touch everything because whatever it is, here's one of the problems, George, is when people talk religion or they talk politics, those are like known as the two top subjects that you avoid. You don't talk those because people get all mad and families break up and spouses get divorced and all sorts of chaos ensues when you talk religion or politics. But my theory, George, is that the only reason that happens is because people are blaming each other for having different beliefs.
Chandler, that's brilliant. I agree with you completely. So much our polarized politics. You can't get anything done here in the United States, with Congress and stuff, because the debate is so heated. The debate is so filled with recriminations and allegations and accusations. It's really like you know and it's a distraction to the extent that like we're emotionally charged because of this free will belief, each side thinking the other side is evil and all. I mean, that doesn't allow us to focus on the problems, well enough to actually solve them.
Exactly. And see, one problem too is, that there's all sorts of blaming that happens among, politicians. And look at the way that politicians try to damage the reputation of the other person that they're running against, so that they get voted for instead of the other person, because if they can come up with some reason why people should not like this person, whatever the dumb reason is, the color of the underwear they wear or whatever it is, then that's how they win. But that's just an ad hominem attack, and then it gets people moved away from their policies. And so that's one of the things that's wrong with politics.
Oh yeah, and the criminal justice system is pretty much the same. These prosecutors, the prosecutors for the state or for the federal government, or just like, lawyers who are prosecuting a case, a civil case, they will do whatever they can to disparage the other person, and they don't, to a great extent, care about how fair it is. They just want to win the case. And it's so, and this is free will based, because like if the world did not believe in free will, everybody would understand how absolutely immoral, those practices are.
Yeah, just imagine a lawyer that doesn't believe in free will, and just imagine like the situation where they're being able to calmly discuss matters um, without blaming, without shaming, and I mean, I know it's far away from the world we live in now, but I imagine it like, well, we're being practical, and this person can be dangerous, so yeah, we have to put him in jail, that sort of thing. But it's not real. Nobody's really to blame fundamentally. Nobody's going to hell. All that sort of stuff. All these things, and people believe that people deserve things.
Exactly. And in our criminal justice system, because of this free will belief, this like, basically that results in much, much worse punishments for crimes. And so what happens is like we spend a lot of money trying to actually determine whether the person is innocent or guilty. Now, here's something a lot of people don't know. Lie detector tests can actually be between 80 and 90% accurate in determining whether a person is lying or not. But the average judge, police officer, lawyer, average person is only about 50% effective. So, like, there are many cases actually where people are like wrongly convicted and all. And so the other thing is like, if somebody like is like accused of something and they know that the penalty because of this free will belief is so extraordinarily unfair and extreme and just fueled by vengeance rather than practicality, then these people are not going to want to admit, that they did whatever, because who can blame them? And so we just spend so much time and resources just trying to find out who did what. Whereas, like in a no free will world, where we would be trying to figure out why did they do what they did, and how can we better help them not go back to that kind of life. If that was our criminal justice system, then people would be far less likely to want to they would admit what they did wrong because they would know that there'd be compassion, that our society and people would be compassionate for them. So again, this is another like huge harm that free will belief does, within our world today.
Exactly. It keeps people from investigating the why of what people do.
Yes.
And here's the deal is that by removing free will belief from religion and from politics, what I think will happen is instead of of simply going, oh, you did this thing that, like, for example, in the case of religion, it's like, you did this thing that the Bible says is bad, therefore you will be punished. Or in politics, it's like, oh, you did this thing that our laws of our country say is bad, so you will be punished. But the problem with both of those approaches is that they never get to the why of what people are doing. And this is why, as soon as free will belief is removed, then basically everybody becomes philosophers and psychologists just automatically, because all of a sudden they're aware, oh, yeah, there's causes for why people do what they do. And by investigating that, we can rehabilitate, we can make improvements, and only not punish any more than is absolutely necessary for the purpose.
Absolutely, exactly. It'd just be so much more of an intelligent world.
Yes, it would. And that's just it, is I think that, yeah, people have been fighting the wrong fight in regards to religion. That's basically our theme is, you know, it's really difficult to it's really the notion of somebody deserving punishment, the notion of retribution, and all these sorts of things that I've always found the most harmful about religions. But here's one way of demonstrating, George, that these things are not the result of religion specifically. Rather, look at all the different wide variety of religions that have these problems, that inspire violence, that have these notions. Like, think of, okay, here's a one. A lot of them have animal sacrifice. And this is strange because their belief is that a human has sinned, and so they deserve punishment, and so they need somebody else to be sacrificed as an atonement to pay for the sins of the human. Which, wait a minute, if you never believed that anybody deserved punishment in the first place, you would remove the need for animal sacrifice too.
Yeah, that whole animal sacrifice thing is just completely irrational. It's extremely weird. I mean, like I don't know how, so many people came up with something like that. I know.
Yeah. And so what we have here, I mean, sure, it's not going to be easy, but I think we have a shot with this, because if somebody keeps trying to fight against religion, they're basically, I don't know, it's sort of like they're, they're just, I mean, that's so broad. That's so broad. It's like, well, religion can encompass everything, including Buddhism and Jainism, which is classified as a religion, but is not exactly the most harmful thing. So they need to get specific and target the things that are causing harm, rather than just attacking religion. And, like, for example, you might have heard of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, well, from what I know about them, is that they're always fighting legal battles. Who knows how much money they waste fighting legal battles and trying to get manger scenes removed from public property and crazy stuff like that. And
Yeah, well, hopefully they're more specific in their goals because, like, I think ideally they're kind of like, for example, sometimes religions will advocate for like denying certain people rights and all, but the problem with fighting against religion is unlike this issue of free will, despite compatibilist efforts to confuse the matter, free will is a very, very clear yes, no, black and white issue. It's very easy to define free will. It's very easy to refute it. That's not the case with religion. Religion is a very vague concept that there's wide disagreement on what exactly it is. So like, how are you going to kind of like, how are you going to like attack a whole religion? You have to attack the ideas that are harmful within the religion. You don't want to attack religion. Religion may actually be kind of an evolutionary component of the human species. It's kind of like, we developed mathematics, we developed science, we developed religion. It's what we do.
yes, and see, here's the deal. Yeah, I agree it's too broad. And when you attack religion or you attack God, what you're doing is you're attacking such a vague, disagreed upon, fuzzy thing that you're wasting your time when you try to fight that. And that's what I've realized
Exactly.
after
As
watching.
opposed to the free will belief. For example, imagine imagine all right, this will take time, but let's say 50 years from now, everybody for the last 30 years before that, maybe 40 years, has understood that free will is an illusion. We get agreement on that. Then several decades go by, and during that time in the future, it will be logically impossible for a person to blame another person for anything. Can you imagine what kind of a different, more peaceful, harmonious, wonderful world that's going to create? I mean, this free will belief is probably the main source of evil on the planet. I mean, certainly, the other what competes perhaps with it a bit is that we individuals, we people tend to compete over limited resources. But even that competition would be so much more civil without this free will belief.
Yeah, and see, that's just it, George, is, I think what will happen is once people are no longer taking their opinions personally because they know that it wasn't up to them, once people don't believe in free will, then all of a sudden someone can disagree with them, and then they're not like, oh, you disagree with me, so now I don't like you anymore and I hate you. So people can like, okay, you disagree, let's talk about why we disagree, let's see if we can come to an agreement. And so basically people can have peaceful discussion, and that's what giving up free will belief allows. And I think the problem, George, is that no progress will really be made in regards to the abortion issue or the animal issue, or even the climate change issue until we eliminate the free will belief that causes people to become hostile and fight those who are trying to educate them on the facts.
Absolutely. And, again, without the free will belief, sure, people may disagree on certain things, but that disagreement will be completely respectful, completely civil. People aren't going to be fighting each other over what they disagree in, and that will create a brand new world. I mean, like I'm saying, will because like we know the sun's going to come out tomorrow. I mean, like it'd be pretty strange if the sun just blew up and it didn't come out tomorrow, whatever. So like with that same level of confidence, we can say that free will is on its last legs. It's just like it's not going to survive, so it's just a matter of decades. And so like when that happens, again, we're going to like experience a profoundly categorically new world, a much happier world because as you and I know, this is why are we doing this show? We're doing this podcast. It's about happiness. The free will belief limits our happiness by getting us fighting against each other and even fighting with ourselves over something that's completely mistaken.
Yeah, that's just it, George, is I really think that, a lot of the stuff that has happened, like for example, I've gotten a lot of, hatred off the internet from people who find out that I'm vegan or find out I'm anti-abortion, or another thing that's happened recently is, Jamie Soden and we were both trying to explain to people that pedophilia is not a choice because sexual orientation, sexual attraction isn't a choice, and trying to explain that to people and how we should help these people understand them, and then people were just reacting emotionally, not listening to what we were actually saying, and saying that we were child rapists and crazy drama happened, which is why we kind of quit talking about it, because what happens is people are just not educated enough to listen to the points we're trying to make, because they have such deep reactions of blame based on free will belief that they accuse people of things when all
Well,
they are trying to do is explain something.
right. And Chandler, you know what Jamie and you might want to do? Because I think people purposely take that personal tone and accuse you of all this stuff as a way to silence you. In other words, like they want to get to you, they want you to be afraid of come out with your position because they know they can't defeat it in a fair argument. So they get personal. They, these ad hominems is like insane stuff. So
Exactly.
you might want to kind of like, when Jamie and you promote these ideas that like, and again, this whole pedophilia thing, it's like, basically without the free will belief, we certainly we have to address it and all, but it'd be without the hatred, and without the hatred, we can understand it, we can help these people, whatever. So like, when Jamie and you are presenting your case, and somebody comes up with some kind of like allegation or some kind of nonsense, just ignore it. Just like go on presenting your point, and you determine the direction of debate. Don't allow them to control the debate.
Exactly, and that's what I've learned over time is I've been ignoring comments that are just nothing but personal attacks and just nonsense. The problem is Jamie hasn't had such an easy time with that. He still keeps wanting to fight with them, but that's how it goes. But yeah, I know that people are trying to silence us, but that's just not going to happen because we have important work to do with over exploring this illusion of free will, ridding the world of this free will belief that causes so much harm. And because it covers so many other issues, because it covers all sort the obesity issue, the sexuality issue, and religion, it covers abortion, it covers all these different topics that are also controversial. There are going to be people who are going to try to shut us up about these individual issues. But I'll tell you one thing, I'm determined in more than one sense of the word.
Excellent. All right, and there's another thing for even within our group, because we all agree on free will, but we don't agree completely on the implications of this in terms of like, if we're not controlling reality, who or what is? And it's a similar thing, like so like what I would suggest, we've done about half an hour of this. Let's because like for me, it's about exploration. In other words, part of this is like to help the world, but part of it is helping the world by getting a clearer conception of reality. So how about if we do our next podcast um, on like, if we don't have a free will, who or what is controlling everything? Because that, we get into order, we get into causality, we get into consciousness, and that is the next, Chandler, in terms of like basic science, that is the next step in this whole debate. We understand that free will is an illusion. It's going to take, the people who don't some time, but we don't have to wait for them. We can continue on to the next step in all this.
Exactly, and that's where it gets really interesting when we explore the implications of not having a free will and how it changes all of our other ways we think about things. So I agree. Yeah, I think we covered a lot in this episode. I think the original point was that religion would be much less harmful without free will belief, and so would many other areas politically and morally and just society in general without this free will belief. And so people have been fighting the wrong target. So yeah, that's the point I want people to take home with this episode. Is there anything else we need to say, or should I end this one?
No, I think we covered it really well.
Okay, I think we did too. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs and George Ortega, and I hope you've learned a lot from this episode. And if not, we don't blame you because you don't have a free will. So, thank you for listening and goodbye.